all the data is already there. It's plugging in those data sources. There are service providers in a very competitive market where we see continuous price erosion. So that's not something that distinguishes us, and it's not hard to get by. Some data, it's just not there, and then you can choose whether you basically have a bunch of operators calling around and calling the truck driver, hey, where are you? You can do that. It's expensive.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. While ERP systems have done a wonderful job in providing the traceability of transactions in the four walls of the factory, the traceability across industry is limited. The limitation exists because of so many factors such as technology limitations, disparate datasets, political control, and data sharing agreements. The technical concepts such as digital material and blockchain technologies are powerful to help provide visibility for shippers, trade finance companies, or any other stakeholders involved with the end-to-end supply chain transactions. In today's episode, our guest, Arnoud Star Busmann, discusses the importance of supply chain at the industrial level. He also discusses the importance of digital material and how that helps track the expensive commodity across the supply chain. Finally, he discusses how blockchain technologies are helping track supply chain across non-traditional datasets where there might be political issues with data sharing. Let me introduce Arnoud to you. Arnoud Star Busmann is the CEO of MineHub Technology. He is one of the pioneers in the intersection of commodity supply chains, finance, and enterprise blockchain technology. Prior to joining MineHub, he was the innovation lead for commodities at ING Bank, where he led the cross-industry initiative Easy Trading Connect that spawned some of the leading blockchain platforms for post-trade processing of physical commodity transactions. Arnoud is an all-round executive with tech DNA and has over 20 years experience in strategy execution, enterprise transformation, and blue-chip startups. After obtaining a master's degree in computer science in the Netherlands, he lived and worked across Europe, Asia, and Oceania. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, hey Arnoud. Welcome to the show.
How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, and I am very excited to have you, the kind of knowledge that you are going to bring from the supply chain perspective. Typically, we are in the boundaries of a facility. Today, we are going to be a little outside, I guess, from that. So we are going to have a lot of fun. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your quick intro as well as what you are focusing on these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So before MineHub, I was actually with ING Bank, based in the Netherlands. And ING is the world's largest commodity banker, meaning they finance the big supply chains, the big commodity supply chains. And in that capacity, I had a lot of exposure to how these supply chains work and basically better said, how they not work, right? So in 2016, we started looking really at digitization of these supply chains. Now, coming from the bank wants to get efficiency, right? Reduce the cost of operations, but also manage their risk better, having better view of collateral and documents and stuff like that. But it's very hard to make that organizational change and that digital transformation if all your customers are still operating with paper. They're sending you paper and emails and WhatsApps and WeChats and stuff like that. Yeah. So we started looking at how can we change that? What does it take to go digital? And functionally, it's easy, right? I mean, it's just the functionality is well understood. It's shared data, etc. But how do you really move ecosystems of companies that do business with each other in continuously reconfiguring networks. How do you get to move them all at the same time? And that's really where we started looking at, where we thought that blockchain might be a tool to facilitate that. So we set up ventures in energy, soft commodities, and commodity trade finance. And then in 2018, I really started looking at mining and metals, particularly iron ore. At the beginning, with the large mining companies in Singapore. But I also got involved with a couple of guys in Vancouver that were starting a project called MineUp, backed by a couple of large industry parties. And then we started building from there, taking all those lessons, right? And that's how I got here. That's what we're focusing on now. We are basically digitizing industrial supply chains. It's it's weird that we still need to do that, but it's one of those areas of the industry that has been remarkably resistant to change and digitization. We're focused on mining and metals, very conservative industry, very risk averse because of the nature of the assets and the projects, but actually quite keen to start moving. And we see a lot of industry collaboration on making those changes and going digital. And that's what we've been working on. So MineUp it's a blockchain based platform. It's focused on streamlining post-trade execution of physical commodity transaction. And when I talk post-trade, it means that if you go to Amazon, you do your search, you hit the one-click button, and then you forget, you switch off your laptop, whatever. But then the real work starts, right? And particularly if you're looking at, oh shit, how we're going to get this $20-30 million worth of commodities initially on a boat? How do we get it to the other side of the world? Get it through customs, get it paid for? So you end up with 20, 30 companies collaborating on that shipment. And it's remarkably complex and manual and paper heavy, that process. And that's what we do the stuff after the one click. And so we've been building, refining MineUp over the last few years to a commercial stage, signed our first revenue last summer. We've been working on that project with really the giants of mining and metals industry. And why? And that's not easy as a startup. Normally, as a startup, you say, let's start with an easy customer, see if it works, and then do a second customer, things like that. Our proposition: we need to change an industry, and we need to really break through network effects that are incredibly resistant to change, right? That really make it hard to change. And the only way to do it is to work with the industry leaders, and not just leaders in terms of market volumes, but also the leaders that understand that the world is changing, want to change the world, and are taking that initiative. So we've been working with really large groups like BHP, big Chinese parties, Brazilian parties, Japanese parties, and focusing on how can we digitize it, how can we move this big commodity flows, that essentially digitally connecting the sales teams and the logistics teams on the one hand to the procurement teams on the other side on one platform. And that's what we've been doing. So naturally following our customers and our customers' customers and suppliers that found us ending up in building a team that spans across North America, Europe, Singapore, China, Japan, Brazil, Chile, everywhere where our customers are. So it's been a ride, but we've really proven that it can be done, and it's growing now. We're generating revenue, adoption is increasing, and now we put it on steroids because we put out in the press last week an announcement that we acquired a company called Weybridge. Technically, it's an acquisition. I would call it almost more a merger from an organization perspective. Very synergetic, strategic, accretive, complementary organizations, customers, but the same vision and mission, just working on different parts of the supply chain. We work from the mine going downstream to their customers, like the smelters. Weybridge started really on the manufacturing side, working upstream towards the mining side, and then we started meeting in the middle, and now connecting the dots instantly. And there are not many of us that are doing this because it is a complex field. It is expensive to play in because you're dealing with these giants, and the barriers to entry is high. But now this is a match made in heaven, which will really fast forward our path to critical mass. And when I'm saying that, obviously as a company, I'm interested in getting to critical mass and scale my business, but it's even more important for the industry itself because we can really start making those network effects add value to the customers, because that's what it's all about. Right? So it's a fantastic move, and now we're just really focusing hard on keeping these companies focused, right, on customers, on delivery, on both our roadmaps, as we slowly, carefully start integrating business, and particularly the underlying data layers. It's so if you ask me in summary what I've been working on over last last years, it's really change is hard, and we've been working with industry leaders really to break down and reverse network effects against change and making them work for us, and that's what we've been doing, and that's where we're focusing on now in terms of accelerating that's the benefit.
Okay, very interesting. So obviously there are a lot of different layers that I would love to dig into. Obviously there is a lot there. Okay, so we need to unpack all of that. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest, and that is going to be Arnoud, your perspective on business growth.
Growth of our business, it's really, you want to see this. I think every startup comes up with a hockey stick, right? You go to university, you show this big hockey stick and see if you just project it with this multiplication factor, this is what happens. A lot of times it's supported by assumptions in terms of what a growth ratio is. If you look at that, you match your sales team, you go outbound, you have more and more and more salespeople to driving that growth. If you look at where we are playing, we're working in an industry where everybody is connected to everyone, right? So we've got this network structure. So we're focused. Our customers are our salespeople. We grow with our customers. We truly have the exponential structure in the market. And so we are less than selling our solution. It's more about helping our customers connect their supply chains, and we grow with that. So it's a different growth strategy.
Okay, very interesting perspective. So now what I'm going to do is, obviously there was a lot in the beginning of the segment. So, I have a ton of notes here, okay? And I am going to narrate my understanding so that listeners can follow along as well in terms of what is going on here. And then I am going to layer in some details from my perspective in terms of how I understand this space. And then there are going to be some clarifications that maybe you want to touch on based on this, okay? So when you started the commentary, it started with banks, okay? And when you talk about supply chain and banks, I'm not sure how the dots are connected, but you did mention one layer there, which is about collateral. So my understanding is going to be that these mining companies that are shipping goods, obviously they need to work with banks, I guess, to be able to fund. I don't know what's going on there. So maybe in the next segment, or if you want to touch that right away, maybe provide some colors there.
I'll have to.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So trade finance is a massive industry.
Okay.
I think it's probably around $20 trillion size, right? It's huge. Every supply chain uses working capital one form or another, whether it's on balance sheet or whether it's third-party capital. And you've got big trade banks that are providing that. There's a specialist domain. If you look at, and most of the finance, it's like a mortgage. You lend it to someone. Yeah. If you hope that if it's a personal loan, you need to pay back. You go to the guy, hey, I need my money back. And then if the person doesn't do it or the person goes bankrupt, it gets hard to get it back. If it's a mortgage, it's a house, right? So if you're a borrower doesn't pay you back, you say, okay, I'll take possession of your house and I'll sell your house in the market and recover my collateral that way. There's a certain segment in supply chains, and it's huge. It's like a $10 trillion industry called commodity supply chains. And these are financed by banks as well, often. And if you deal with traders that are the biggest consumers of that working capital, they're thinly capitalized, yet they can finance $100 million shipments. Now, how can they do that? If they have got a balance sheet of maybe $2 million, how can you do that? It's because the bank doesn't rely on going to the trader, hey, pay me back. If the trader falls away, right? Go to liquidate. They can seize the collateral and immediately liquidate on the market where there's terminal markets. So they're protected by the underlying assets. Now, given the value of the assets that are at play here, $30 million shipment of copper concentrate or a $10 million shipment of copper cathodes or what have you. And these shipments, they're somewhere on the ocean on a boat, right? Yeah. And you rely on some documents that your borrower has given you. So see, it's my shipment and it's really there and stuff like that. So there's a risk in that. Yeah. And we've seen last couple of weeks ago, Trafigura lost $500, $600 million because there was nickel. They thought they were buying nickel, but it wasn't there, right? It was blocks of iron. So for banks to have real-time visibility on the assets that they're financing, the collateral, that's the holy grail. Now, for banks, it's very interesting to work with platforms like ours because we have that underlying information. We provide that information. We know who's the title holder. We know the value of the cargo. We know who touched it. We know who inspected it. All that information is there. So it gives a lot of certainty. Makes it a lot easier for banks and financiers to step into these supply chains. A lot of these projects were started by banks. I was one of them, right? We started these projects, and what banks do very well is technology and IT and so that, but they are used to looking after themselves very well. I'll build something that's really good for me, and I'm going to push all the work to my customers, and then I'm going to try and convince the customers to start using that platform. That doesn't work, right? So you need to start with the corporates and build a solution that works for their supply chains, and then the bank is the other way around.
Okay, very interesting. So obviously we need to unpack a little bit more there as well, and maybe we need to connect the dots in terms of, number one, you mentioned that there are going to be 20 to 30 different parties involved in the whole transaction. And I understand that, okay, in this particular case, you have the traders who are supplying this material, and the banks need to have visibility because they are sort of financing this because the traders are not going to have the working capital to be able to afford that, to be able to sell. And once the sale is done, I guess, they are probably going to pay back to the bank. I don't know how that transaction is related, right? So overall, from the visibility perspective, so you are selling this to bank, and bank has this assurance that, wherever the asset is, I don't know what they are doing with that information. Maybe you want to touch a little bit on that too. So this platform is used by the banks, and banks are mandating that everybody is going to be entering their information, because if they don't enter the information, then you are not going to have the end-to-end traceability of the good that they are trying to track. So do you want to unpack a little bit more in terms of, number one, who owns the platform and how the data is coming to the platform?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. And let me start by saying that we start with the corporates. The banks are optional.
Okay.
Right? And so if we take a step back in terms of where we're heading in the world of supply chains.
Yeah.
Like in the old days, and this makes me feel old saying that, but if you buy a piece of copper, you care about the physical material that you can basically transform into copper wire or put it in a smelter or whatever, right? But nowadays, a ton of copper is no longer just a ton of copper. It's much more about the ton of copper, right? It's about where is it? Who owns it? Where is it coming from? Where has it been? What is the content? What is the emissions profile of that ton of copper? What vessel is it on? What's the ETA? All those questions is very information intensive supply chains. So what you are starting to see is the material, I call it, consists of physical and digital material. Yeah. And they're inseparable, right? So you've got the physical piece you can hold in your hand, but the digital material is really about that physical material. And that is how companies can start adding value to it. Now, if you look at how that digital material, location, etc., is constructed, it consists of data points like, okay, so what's the contract? Who owns it? Who ships it? What's the price? What's the specification? What's the ETA? What boat is it on? All those aspects are digital material. This is information that the buyer and the seller agree and continuously, and other parties continuously collaborate on. Yeah. Regardless of a bank. But the beauty is that information set you can use in many different parts. If you know what how the commodity is transacted, and you know what route it takes, and you know the emissions content of the product, suddenly you can calculate automated calculation of scope 3 emissions just as a byproduct. Yeah. On MineHub, what you can do is you do your transaction, you do your $30 million shipment, work on the data, and you just add a bank, a financier, to the transaction, like giving him a front row seat or her in a transaction, and they can see what happened. They don't have to do anything, right? They just have the visibility of the information, and suddenly you unlock risk management. And that is what we're doing. So, to be honest, I started with the banks, and then from there, what I've learned is I need to start with the corporates. So I spent all my time on corporates and slowly started getting back into the banks because I know they're going to need what we built, right? So.
Yeah, so very interesting. So basically, the whole story is starting from the corporation who are trying to buy the shipment, right? And then in the exchange of that transaction, there might be 20 to 30 different companies that might be involved. But then the company that is trying to buy the physical commodity as well as the shipment, they want to keep track of the information. They want to keep track of the exchange. So now the next layer that I am going to bring in is going to be typically when you look at this particular scenario, and I don't know whether you are going to be comfortable with this or not, but most companies, the way they like to track is they are going to have some sort of TMS platform. If you look at companies such as your custom brokerage, okay, they are going to have their own sort of platform. And typically these are probably going to be the proprietary platform that they are building for their own usage.
Absolutely.
Because they have to track the shipments and shipment from their perspective. Everybody's tracking from their perspective. And then they have to track every single movement because they are recognizing their revenue. They are making sure whatever lag they might have or, whatever length of the movement that they might have, they need to track all of that. They need to optimize their revenue. They need to recognize their revenue. But I mean, that is only the length that they care for because that's their territory. Okay. But in the entire supply chain,
exactly,
a lot more legs involved. So now when you compare and contrast with your platform, how does this sort of overlay with the TMS platform that all of these companies may have a TMS platform because they all are trying to ship something, right? And then you might have these companies which might have the proprietary platform. So I don't know if there is going to be a little overlap. This platform is different. Do you understand where I'm going with this?
I understand exactly where you're going, and yeah. So if you look at the parties involved, right? So with a shipment, let's say you've got a producer, you've got an end consumer, you've got a trader, you've got multiple banks, 3 to 4 banks involved in that process. You got a customs agent, shipping agents, you got inspectors, you got warehouses, you got a vessel master, you got lots and lots of different parties, and each of them doing their own little bit and creating a little piece of the data and using part of the data, right? So the inspector creates an inspection report. They go there, provide the inspection report, provide it and the quantity and the quality, and give it to their customer. That's a piece of data. The carrier moves the stuff, has a location, and the location is provided via satellite. You can track it, right? So, or you type in the BL number and you know which vessel it's on and where that vessel is. So, going back to the digital material concept, MineUp is not about building the mother of all solutions for everything, and everybody must use MineUp if you want to send each other a message. It's more, we see each other as like a foundry, a manufacturer of digital material, where we connect lots of different data sources to provide that, construct that digital material that companies want to have. So we will plug in the seller's ERP system, and we'll connect it to the buyer's Excel sheet. We will take the satellite data, put it directly into the digital copper, so it's visible. We know what truck is on, it's on, so we've got the details, and we plug that in. So it's more connecting all those individual systems and sources of data and consumers of data through one common data platform. That's what we do.
Okay, very interesting. So obviously, I mean, this has a lot of similarity, and I don't know if you're going to be comfortable comparing this with some of the other solutions that companies might be using. And I don't know if you are able to talk about the pros and cons of each of the approaches. I know that some companies have built their own sort of digital network. Sometimes they call it a supply chain control tower. I don't know if, again, this is a similar space or not, but supply chain control tower is a very common term when you are going to be talking about all of these networks coming together and you are keeping track of the entire supply chain in general. Okay. So with these control towers, there are many different flavors, the way they all work. Some are going to be slightly more platform centric. For example, I don't know whether you followed the news from Microsoft where they have announced that, they are going to be providing a lot more data because data itself is a problem. Sometimes that is guarded by a lot of different corporations. So you don't even have data. Okay. You don't have access to data. So the traceability you are not going to have, even if you, let's say, technically were able to implement If you don't have those data sets and those are guarded by some companies, then you are not going to have that. So maybe compare and contrast in terms of what Microsoft is doing with their supply chain capabilities, and then all of these supply chain control tower tools that we have available in the market versus what you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question, and I think the more people start looking in this area, the more validation is that of what we're building, right? But
yeah,
I would say the control tower for me is a particular application, a particular way of adding value to digital material, because you got all your shipments happening, alerting happening, dashboards. It's very, very powerful for that matter, and the data that Mineup will have on its platform will feed control towers. Now, if you've got your own SAM tower, right, you can
SAM tower. I like it.
Take the you can take the exhaust from Mineup and data exhaust and plug it in and do your analytics exactly the way you want to operate your business.
Yeah.
The difference being with many of these things is that you're talking about a solution that you're using for yourself. Your counterparty might have a different solution, different type of control tower. So we are stepping in between organizations into a no man's land that is currently consists of email, voice messages, WhatsApps, WeChats. That information is not structured. It's not available. So to make a comparison to ERP, why was ERP so transformative? Because suddenly you get a company, globally operating company, working on the same single source of truth, right, the data. You've got accounts payable being linked to your procurement. You've got basically your CRM and your sales management linked to your inventory and invoice management and all the general ledger. It's perfect. Streamlines a lot, but that doesn't exist at an industry level. So what Mineup really is looking at, so how do we construct an ERP at an industry level where we have different departments are actually different companies and they're collaborating on that. So, and they have different functions. If I look at other solutions that are out there, and I'll come to the Microsoft one shortly, is a lot of it is around point solutions. They're solving particular problems like secure document exchange or electronic signature, or they're looking at, for instance, electronic bills of lading, or they want to track and trace, have visibility on where the shipment is, compliance, traceability, right? So all those things are really point solution. And if you look underneath it, they all sort of rely on the same data set, but that data set needs to be acquired. And you acquire that in that intercompany collaboration and workflow that Mineup facilitates. Right? It's so that's the difference. We don't have to. It's great if those applications exist, so that I don't have to deploy resources to build that. Now, if I then look at what Microsoft does, I think it's and I won't go into the merits of it. It's a very logical thing to do. It's a very different part of the market. It's very consumer focused. We're looking at the real bulk commodity shipments that are high value, low volume. Microsoft is probably looking at the low value, high volume shipments, very much focused on visibility. But it's and I guess every company wants to capture an ecosystem, but it's we decided to start using blockchain technology because the feedback that we're getting from our customers is and users in the market is this is a very trustless market, right? Everybody will try and screw the other guys on price or whatever if they can get away with it. So lawyers are making a ton of money in this high value shipments. So that, and gaming is protecting against gaming that's what you solve for. Risk management, we're actually talking about company changing losses that can wipe out your balance sheet if you get it wrong. So supply chain risk management, resilience is a different ballgame there. Now, because it's also so competitive, nobody is going to sit on the same database as somebody else, right? Nobody. They're not comfortable. Even if you explain, no, but it's segregated and you got all the information security. It's just not going to happen, right? So that security is very important, and particularly because you're collaborating on the same piece of data, you want to make sure that no party can change something nobody can change the data without both parties knowing and agreeing to it. So the governance, the ownership of the platform is very important. What we're looking at is there's another unique problem that we need to solve. This is around data residence. So if you're in commodities, particularly in mining metals, you do business in China. China is the key market for pretty much everything. China has some very strict data management regulation regimes, right? Like other companies, very focused on protecting data assets that are onshore. And rightly so. I mean, they're the most advanced and the least naive in what data means, right? And so if you do business in China and with a Chinese company, that data needs to stay in China, right? If it originates in China. Now, the rest of the world doesn't necessarily want to run on a Chinese platform, right? They don't want to be reliant on the Chinese government to look after their data.
Yeah.
So how do you solve that? It means that if you've got one piece of data, one asset like a bill of lading or a contract they share between two parties, one of them in Singapore, one of them in China, you got two physical copies that need to stay in sync. And not because one person, hey, I changed something, okay, I believe you, and send a screenshot. It's mathematical proof that both are in sync all the time. And that's what blockchain technology gives us, right? That integrity. Now, as I understand Microsoft, that's not a blockchain service. So you end up having data potentially all over the globe, naturally in Azure, as the environment. But how do you solve that problem? How do you have the same data sitting in China and Singapore? You can't, right? So there's fundamental differences with regards to the trust that you need to have in a company like ours. Like let's say we're wildly successful, which we will be in copper, right? All the copper flows in the world are going to be on MineUp. Do you really believe that this such a fundamental, important industry is going to let a small company like ours look after all the data? I don't believe it. And so it's around data governance, and so it's becoming really important. And Microsoft or even Amazon or others are not necessarily the most trusted custodians in the world for that data either, right? So our job is really to give the custody back.
Yeah, so some very interesting commentary there. So obviously there are a lot of different layers overall, and whenever you talk about data, then politics is always going to be there, power control, power struggle.
Yes.
So that's very interesting there. Obviously, I need to unpack a little bit. I'm not sure if my listeners are going to be able to follow in terms of how you are able to get access to the data when companies such as Microsoft is not able to get that because they are obviously very powerful overall when you look at the cloud in the marketplace. So I don't know if your initiatives are going to be driven by the industries or is it supported by the government that you are able to solve this? I know I'm not too sure if I understand blockchain completely in terms of how blockchain is going to be able to solve this problem, but I do agree with your comment related to Microsoft because when I looked at their data set, the kind of data set that they were trying to get into their platform, it was all from UPS, FedEx. Okay, the feeds that they had a bunch of other feeds. I guess they are able to get roughly 10 data feeds or maybe 12, not more than that. But the primary data source in their feed is going to be UPS, FedEx. So you are right that is slightly more consumerized market. These are going to be shipments which are parcel shipments, I guess. Yeah, not really the high value shipment that you are talking about. So number one question I'm going to have.
Yeah. So and a lot of that is around data points, right? So, but just knowing where a shipment is not necessarily enough. You need to know what's in the shipment, who owns it, what's the value, where has it been from a compliance perspective. So if you want to comply with, let's say, the Inflation Reduction Act, whatever it's called in the US, right? In terms of mandating that a certain amount of metals, commodities need to come from friendly jurisdictions. Just knowing where the vessel is or where the courier bag is not going to help you at all, right? It doesn't solve that question. You need to be able to track the entire shipment and know what's on it. So cross-correlated. We plug in data sources for couriers because we sometimes need to track the courier bag that has the bill of lading, right? So it's not magic, but it's a different market.
Okay, so very interesting. So where is this data coming from? So let's say if it is not going to be from UPS, FedEx, is this coming from government or these transportation companies? who are publishing this data, because obviously you need to get access to the data. Blockchain is just going to be a technology that is trying to make those correlations when you are going to get all of those data feeds. So you need to get that data from somewhere, and I'm pretty sure there is a heavy price tag associated with that. Data is never free.
Yeah, but it's interesting, right? So it's a very congested market now, visibility on shipments, because there's digitization of that market. For if I want to know where a vessel is, I've got many different ways to get the information, all quite low cost, because they're all competing with each other. If I want to know where if I've got a BL number, bill of lading number,
yeah,
I can go to a particular website or send it to an API, and I get exactly which vessel and what's in and where it is, right? So all the data is already there. It's plugging in those data sources. There are service providers in a very competitive market where we see continuous price erosion. So that's not something that distinguishes us, and it's not hard to get by. Some data, it's just not there, and then you can choose whether you basically have a bunch of operators calling around and calling the truck driver, hey, where are you? You can do that. It's expensive, but if the shipment is high value, you get it. But to be honest, if you had it with couriers, the last mile that they say they have delivered but actually didn't deliver it or delivered it somewhere else, it's still quality of data is very important.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, could not agree more. I mean, it's always very troublesome, especially when you are talking about the logistics space, because you are dealing with many different parties and they are all going to have different data stored. So correlating that data is always a big challenge in my experience. And, you mentioned the comment that, I am trying to correlate two different countries, one China and one Singapore. Good luck with that, because that's going to be a
No, yeah, you were talking about the TMS, like FedEx and UPS. Of course, they're giant corporations. They're fantastically organized. They have that data. But if you're moving, let's say, copper in Chile, where most of the copper comes from, it's all of it is moved by trucks. Every truck is a single contractor that owns that truck. There's no common transport management system. There's nothing, right? So how do you keep track of that? And that's a completely different ballgame. I mean, you can start doing things like GPS, etc., but there's different levels of maturity. So, it's a fascinating problem, and the more companies are trying to solve it, the better for us. But because I don't want to solve that problem. I'd rather plug in those feeds than do anything else. Right? So.
Yeah, exactly. So when you mentioned the bill of lading number, I know that. I don't know if you are going to have I don't know if there are sort of industry standards about how these numbers are structured, especially when you are going to have, let's say, the carrier, and then you have the shipment, you have the bill of lading number. Is that information enough to be able to find what shipment are we talking about? Or this is always not going to be sort of the unique combination that you can plug in a database and find this information? I don't know if there are any sort of standardization there with respect to just the carrier and bill of lading number. Any comments there by any chance?
Yeah, you've got bill of lading number. Most companies have most carriers will have their own system to generate, but there's always the SCAC number, SCAC, which identifies the carrier. So that combination is unique. So if you have those two things, you basically, you can go to a website on them. We're using, run by a team in Ukraine, funnily enough, the stage, but it's very accessible, and you get exactly where it is. You can do that at a BL level, but you can also type in the number of a container and get the container itself.
Very interesting. And the SCAC number that you are talking about, is that applicable only for the international shipments? Is that applicable for the last mile deliveries as well? Where are the boundaries of that number?
Yeah. So for me, I think that is more the ocean carriers, but
interesting.
Yeah, I'm not. My expertise doesn't go to land tracking. If I talk about, and if I look at the company that we just joined as Waybridge, they are very strong, and what they've built is very strong in land tracking. Right? They can provide to their big customers, which are huge corporations that have hundreds of suppliers. Yeah. They track all the individual shipments across land, so truck, rail, barges in North America. And they plug in many different data sources to create that view. It's not just one.
Yeah, so very interesting. I know we have covered a lot of different grounds, and I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to touch on that we were not able to touch during our conversation. So this is your opportunity. If you have any comments, thoughts, stories that you wanted to cover that you could not cover.
Yeah, maybe. How much time do we have? A couple of minutes, right? So
yeah.
If I think about, we haven't touched on too many examples, but I know, for instance, that one of the examples that we saw is if you've got one of the customers that we've been working with, and Weybridge has been working with, just having visibility on where materials are, they've managed to avoid 5 stockouts at their plants, which is a huge saving. Reducing 2/3 of their inventory on site, which saves an enormous amount of working capital. Got rid of 90% of the Excel usage, right? 60% reduction in email. Improving their forecasting. It's fantastic what you can do just with that data. And I guess the industry has been, where I'm playing in, has really been slow to change, because it's so hard to change an entire industry. Yeah. But it is happening, right? And network effects have not been a friend to change. We're still, since the 17th century, it's still the same stuff. But that trend is reversing, and now it's going to work. So we've got some big companies that are solving the chicken and egg problem. They are setting the example and reducing career risk for decision makers, right? Everybody's a fast follower. Now they can fast follow. So for me, the key message is, right, the value is clear. Nobody questions that. And it is happening, and now is probably the time to start saying, well, maybe we can start moving this, because the standards are emerging in various industries. Maybe Microsoft develops a standard for the last mile solutions, might not maybe for the mining and metals industry, right? And once the standard is there, the value that we will unlock is incredible. If you look at previous standards that have changed complete industries, right? So we're looking forward to that.
Okay, could not agree more. And my personal takeaway is going to be, the more traceability that we are going to have, the easier it is going to be for us to be able to transact, trade, and the more insights that we are going to get in the business as well as in supply chain. So make sure you are at least catching up to these standards and learning what are the options that are going to be there for you. On that note, Arnoud, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure to be here.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Arnoud, head over to minehub.com. It's minehub.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform, or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.